right. Well, last time, if you were with us, we began a study on the book of Nehemiah. Um, and Nehemiah is all about building the wall. So kind of give you a kind of quick little summary from last time to refresh your memory or maybe to catch you up to speed if you weren't here last week. So in 587 BC, Babylon conquers Jerusalem. The temple is destroyed. The city falls, and Jerusalem's best and brightest are carted off to Babylon in exile. There they stay 70 years until the Medes and the Persians come to power. And under Cyrus, the king of Persia, an edict is passed where pretty much anybody that wants to go back to Jerusalem can. If you want to go back home, you can do that. And some do go back. But it's kind of rough going because the nation has been destroyed. The city has been destroyed. Now, among that group of exiles is a man by the name of Nehemiah. Now, he was most likely born in captivity. In other words, he wasn't taken away into exile. He was probably born. He was born in Babylon, it would seem. He's now in Persia. Perhaps he was born in Persia, but he was born in exile. He now works. He has a really good job. He works as the cupbearer to the king, King Artaxerxes. And he has really no desire or thoughts of returning to Jerusalem. Persia is his home now. But one day, some people come to the capital in Persia where he is working and residing, and they're from Judah, and he's asking about the state of things in Jerusalem. How are things back home? Is basically how the conversation goes. And they say, "Oh, not good. Things aren't good. The walls are torn down. The city is in disarray. The gates are burned with fire. I mean, things are really bad." And he is just broken about that. And so he spends some time praying and fasting and seeking the Lord about, fixing the wall. God, fix the wall, fix Jerusalem, do something. And so basically the answer that he gets from God is, I plan on doing that. And Nehemiah, guess who I'm going to use to do that? I'm going to use you. And so the story of Nehemiah is all about God's call on Nehemiah to build the wall. So that's kind of chapter 1. It picks us up in chapter 2 where he's going to go before the king, and he's going to, the king's going to notice that something's wrong and ask him what's going on. He's going to take this opportunity to put his case before the king and see what happens. So let's take a look. We're in Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 1. Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 1. It came to pass in the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when the wine was before him, I took the wine and gave it to the king. Now I had never been sad in his presence before. Therefore the king said to me, "Why is your face sad, since you are not sick? This is nothing but sorrow of heart." So I became dreadfully afraid. Said to the king, "May the king live forever. Why should my face not be sad when the city, the place of my father's tombs, lies waste and its gates are burned with fire?" Then the king said to me, "What do you request?" So I prayed to the God of heaven, and I said to the king, "If it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in your sight, I ask that you send me to Judah, to the city of my father's tombs, that I may rebuild it." Then the king said to me, the queen also sitting beside him, "How long will your journey be, and when will you return?" So it pleased the king to send me, and I set him a time. Furthermore, I said to the king, "If it pleases the king, let letters be given to me for the governors of the region beyond the river, that they must permit me to pass through till I come to Judah, and a letter to Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest, that he must give me timber to make beams for the gates of the citadel, which pertains to the temple, for the city wall, and for the house that I will occupy. And the king granted them to me according to the good hand of my God upon me. Okay, so if you remember from chapter 1, it's in the month Chislev that he gets word of from the people back home of how bad things are in Jerusalem. It's now in chapter 2, when chapter 2 picks up, it's the month Nisan. Um, Chislev is in the wintertime, um, November, December. Nisan is in the springtime, March or April. So it's been at least 3 months, maybe a little bit longer since he's gotten word. Why did he wait so long before he talked to the king? Yeah, so we're told that in chapter 1 that he spent a great deal of time. Um, if you look in verse 4, uh, when I heard these words, I sat down and wept and mourned for many days and was fasting and praying before the God of heaven. So he was spending a great deal of time. Do what? Waiting for an answer from God. Yeah, I mean, it kind of takes time, wrestling with what God wants me to do. I think he was probably a little bit scared. I would be to go before um, the king that I worked for and say, "Hey, I want to rebuild a city that's known for for its rebellion against foreign powers." I mean, it could be seen as treason. I mean, there's a lot of reasons to be scared. But I think what Danny said is probably a good part of the answer as well, is that, he was wrestling with, what am I supposed to do? What does God want me to do? And is he really telling me to go back to Jerusalem and build a wall? Have I lost my mind? Am I hearing God correctly? And so he's just wrestling with that. And so we're going to talk, as we work through Nehemiah, we're going to talk a lot about the call of God, because that's really what the book is about. Um, and I would just say to you, whatever God is calling you to do, it really, working out a call takes time. And I know this from experience, because you've got to go through the whole deal. God, you've got the wrong man, I mean, I'm the kid that my voice shakes when I give an oral book report. You don't want me, and you have to work through the whole deal. For me, it was probably about a year and a half process. And I really don't think that I was in rebellion against God. I just couldn't really believe that he would be calling me. But he convinced me that he was. Um, I, I'm, I'm not going to say, I've heard people's testimony that, well, I was in a prayer meeting one night and I just heard God speak, and he said, get up and preach the gospel. And I just run down that aisle and I surrendered to the ministry, and I've never looked back since. Now, I'm not saying that God can't or don't work that way, because God is God and he can do what he wants to. Um, I would just say that I don't think that's the norm. Most of the men, or women either for that matter, that are in any kind of ministry or missions or whatever, that have wrestled with the call of God, it's not over and, oh, I hear the call and then I'm God. I mean, it's something you wrestle with for days and weeks, months, sometimes, stretching into years. Um, and, most of the people that I have known that, that's their testimony, well, I got saved, and 6 months later, on a Sunday night, God called me to preach, and that very first time I heard God's voice, I walked that aisle, and I surrendered, and 6 months later, I was in the pulpit preaching. They don't preach for very long. I mean, it's a quick flash in the pan, and then they're gone. There's something about counting the cost. There's something about, hey, that God wants you to wrestle with. This is for the rest of your life. Are you sure you want to do this? And then you have to go through the whole, God, are you sure you want me to do this? You know what a knucklehead, what a scoundrel I am. God's in the business of calling scoundrels, by the way. I know firsthand, because I am one. But I think that does that so that when people see what God does in you, they'll go, man, God must be real, because I knew this knucklehead back in high school, and there ain't no way he'd ever be in a pulpit. But I just think it takes time to wrestle through that. That is the norm anyway. And so I think what you're seeing here is Nehemiah kind of wrestling through that call and working through that. And so he goes before the king, and he serves the king's wine. And the king sees him. He's got his wine, and he's ready to be happy. And he looks out, and there is Nehemiah, his cupbearer, and he's very sad. And he says, boy, what's wrong with you? My paraphrase there. He says, what, why are you so sad? This is nothing more than sadness of heart, you know. And Nehemiah says, I was dreadfully afraid, or I was very much afraid. Now, why do you think Nehemiah would have been very much afraid? Yeah. Yeah, so for one thing, the king, yeah, exactly. The king wants his cupbearer happy. I'm sitting on my throne at the end of a long day. I've got my wine in my hand. I'm ready to relax. And then here's, Mr. Debbie Downer or whatever. He was Donnie Downer or whatever. I don't know. He's bringing. The king wants to be happy, and here one of his um, court personnel is sad. It would be like, if you bought a ticket to, to see a stand-up comedian, and all the guy wanted to talk about was that his wife left him and his dog died and his mama got run over by a train or something. I really, I want to be happy. I want you to, to make me happy, not bring me down. So there's some of that. He was not supposed to be sad in the king's presence. He was going to request to go back to Jerusalem and rebuild the wall. Now, this could be seen by the king as treason, because as I said, this is a foreign land who had a history of rebelling against the nation that they were supposed to be subject to, as well as rebelling against their God, and that's what got them in this mess to start with. So the request could be a sign of treason. You want to go back and fortify Jerusalem so that they can make a stand against me, kind of deal. And also, if you read sort of the companion book to Nehemiah, which is Ezra, in chapter 4, verse 21, the king there gives a decree forbidding the rebuilding of Jerusalem, forbidding the refortification of Jerusalem. So he's asking basically the king to go against, what would be considered established law. And hey, I know you passed a law not to rebuild the walls and not to rebuild the city, but I'm asking you to let me do it anyway. So there was a lot there to be fearful of. Now, in how Nehemiah responds to the king, I see both faith and backed up with action. Faith and faith demonstrated in action. What do you see there that is both faith and action? What does he say? What did he say he did? I prayed to the God of heaven, verse 4, and then what did verse 5 say he did? I said to the king. You see, he didn't just pray, nor did he just talk to the king. Because if he just prayed and did nothing, what would that have accomplished? He'd have gone, the wall would have never gotten built if he wasn't willing to step out in faith and do what God was calling him to do. A lot of times we can use an excuse, prayer as an excuse. Prayer is a great thing. We ought to be doing it. But I think a lot of times we use as an excuse, well, I'll have to pray about it after God's already said do it. If God's told you to do something, then you just need to do it. You not continue to delay by praying about it. Because, like I said, prayer becomes an excuse. We're just going to pray about it, for the rest of our lives and never actually get around to doing it. So he prays and then he talks to the king. So there's faith, very much kind of like James would say, faith backed up with works kind of deal. Yeah, he does. He jumped. Yeah, he's probably because he was scared. He did back out. I mean, that's the way. You know, a lot of times if I'm nervous about talking to somebody about something, I pretty much just I'm not a beat around the bush kind of guy. I'm not the guy that's going to take you out to lunch and let's sit down and we're going to eat. We're going to talk for an hour and a half before I ever get around to the point. I'm going to corner you in the hallway and back you in the corner and go, okay, here's what's on my mind. That's just me. So maybe Nehemiah's kind of that way as well. So God blesses in so many ways here. What are some things that you see in how the king responds that you just know God is at work in this? He didn't kill him, right? Yeah. He says, how long are you gonna be gone? What else? Yeah, he gives letters of authorization, verse 7. So basically, he's going to let him travel through all the way from Persia back to Jerusalem through all the various territories. Just let him go. He's got the king's permission. Also, look at verse 8. Uh, he gives him a letter to the keeper of the king's forest now, to give him whatever timber he needs. This is probably the cedars of Lebanon. Uh, he give him whatever wood he needs, whatever timbers he needs to build the walls and build the gate. I mean, basically just a blank check. Whatever you need, just tell the keeper of the forest, and he'll give it to you. Out of my own private forest, uh, he gives him, and then in verse 9, which is I hadn't read that yet. We're about to read it, but he gives him actually a military escort. So he not only gives him letters of authorization to travel into the various territories, he gives him permission to use the king's forest, and he gives him a military escort to make sure that he has safe passage along the way. So in every step of the way, God is blessing. And so Nehemiah is getting affirmation of that call. If Nehemiah ever wondered, is God really telling me to do this, or have I just lost my mind? Surely, after this conversation with the king, that must have solidified that call in his life. Yes. Yeah. Well, that's true. I mean, but so he even won apparently over the queen. So yeah, because the queen was sitting by his side. So don't give away that wood in that forest. You're going to build me a new china cabinet. No, I don't know. Yeah, yeah, right. Queen sitting by his side. But, yeah. When I surrendered, to the ministry, I didn't. So people would come up and they would ask me, what are you going to do? And I'm like, I don't know. I was doing volunteer youth ministry at the time. They're like, "Are you going to be a youth minister?" Da, 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 da. I'm like, I don't know. And there's always this little thing in the back of my mind, like, is God really calling me? I mean, have I lost my mind? I mean, what am I doing? And then after about 3 months, 2 or 3 months, my pastor, my home church says, I've got to be gone next Sunday, and I want you to preach. I said, I never preached. He said, I know. But I said, well, don't you think you ought to be here when I'm? He's like, no, I think I'm going to go, and I think that you need to plow new ground. And I wanted to say no, and I opened my mouth to say no, I don't think so, and what come out is okay. And I was so nervous, and my knees shook, and I was, and I thought, there's no way I'm going to be able to do this. And I got up, and I started preaching. I'm not one of these, weird, things, see angels behind every tree kind of deal. But I'm telling you, it was the most amazing thing. It was like a power came over me that I had never felt before. It was almost like that it wasn't me preaching. I was standing back watching me. And it was something other than anything that I'd ever experienced before. And when I got down out of the pulpit, I never questioned what I was supposed to do with my life again. I just knew. I questioned a lot of things in my life, uh, but it's like I think God knew I needed that affirmation that, okay, Mark, I'm going to give you this rock solid calling because there'll be times in your life that calling is the only thing you have to hang on to. And I think I see God working in a similar way with Nehemiah here. That Nehemiah is going to be in an awfully difficult situation. I mean, people are going to be uh, after him, attacking him, and not just verbally but physically as well. I mean, there's times where they're going to have a trowel in one hand and a sword in the other, trying to build a wall. Uh, he's going to be leaving home, leaving job. I mean, it's going to be a nightmarish challenge, and he needs to know that God is with him. So I think that's why God gives him that. Sometimes we need that. All right, let's look on into verse 9. Verse 9. Then I went to the governors in the region beyond the river and gave them the king's letters. Now the king had sent captains of the army and horsemen with me. When Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite official heard of it, they were deeply disturbed that a man had come to seek the well-being of the children of Israel. So I came to Jerusalem and was there 3 days. Then I arose in the night, I and a few men with me. I told no one what my God had put in my heart to do at Jerusalem, nor was there any animal with me except the one on which I rode. And I went out by night through the valley gate to the serpent well and the refuse gate, and viewed the walls of Jerusalem which were broken down, and its gates which were burned with fire. Then I went on to the fountain gate and to the king's pool, but there was no room for the animal under me to pass. So I went up in the night by the valley and viewed the wall. And I turned back and entered by the valley gate, and so returned. And the officials did not know where I had gone or what I had done, and not yet told the Jews, the priests, the nobles, the officials, or the others who did the work. So I gave you, I didn't point this out earlier, but I will now. I gave you a kind of a little handout. One side is really kind of a cool little map diagram, if you will, of what Jerusalem would have looked like at the time of Nehemiah. And then on the back, you see, and you can see it's kind of that outline, but it was, with the walls torn down, and you can see where the temple would have been up here in the corner. But all the walls are down, and I guess that's poor old Nehemiah there and one of his friends working to build the wall there. So anyway, maybe that's helpful to you. Um, so Nehemiah hadn't gotten very far in the process when he gets some opposition, and it comes in the form of Sanballat and Tobiah, who find out what Nehemiah is wanting to do in rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem, and they put up a great disturbance. They were deeply disturbed, verse 10, that a man had come to seek um, the well-being of the children of Israel. In other words, they don't like this a bit. Why were they opposed to what Nehemiah wanted to do? Yeah, so they were representatives of the Persian government. So they were interested in protecting what they had. If if Judah comes back to power, if Jerusalem is rebuilt, then there is a great fear that we might lose our standing, um, or our place of importance. Um, so, you know, people sometimes, I guess we all have to, ask ourselves the question often, am I, am I building the kingdom or am I protecting my kingdom? And those are two different things. And for Sanballat and Tobiah, they were very much interested in protecting their kingdom, protecting their standing in the Persian kingdom. Also, they were foreigners. If you read on, um, one was a Moabite, one was an Ammonite. So um, they are enemies of the Jews. They don't want to see the Jews prosper and do well. They hate the Jews. So there's some of that bias, some of that hatred / prejudice going on as well. So Jerusalem. Nehemiah gets to town. He gets to Jerusalem, and one of his first items of business is to do an inspection of the wall. So he basically rides his horse around the city, check out the wall, see how bad is it destroyed, what are we going to have to do. He does this at night. Why does he do it at night? Doesn't want anybody to know what he's doing. Doesn't want anybody bothering him. That's true. So, he's already got opposition. He already knows he's got, Sanballat and Tobiah, who are officials from the Persian government that's already opposed to him. Possibly there could be more. He doesn't want opposition on him before he even starts to build. Also, he hasn't yet shared what he's wanting to do with the leaders in Jerusalem. He hasn't shared it with the Jewish people, the leaders of Jerusalem. And it seems as though he wants to find out what do we need to do and formulate some kind of plan so that he can present it to the Jewish people, the leaders of the Jewish people, and say, okay, here's what we need to do. Here's what God's told me to do. Here's my plan. Let's get going. There's a lot of great leadership here, and there's a lot of wisdom that he shows here. He didn't want to reveal too much until he had a plan in place, so that when he does present it to the people, the last thing you want to do if you're trying to lead people to do something is get up and share this idea that you've got, and you don't have a plan of how to get it done or what it's going to take or what do we need you to do or anything. There's no plan. There's just, well, here's what we want to do. We want to build a wall. Okay, how are we going to do that? And that's worse than not saying anything. I don't think I've done it here with the staff at our church, because these guys are they usually have their act together a little bit better than some of the staffs that I've worked with in other churches. But in other churches, we've sat down and I've had the conversation, okay, guys, when we get in front of the people, we're going to act like we know what we're doing, whether we do or not. We may go in the office and close the door and look at each other and go, I don't know what we're going to do next. I don't know. I have no clue what we're doing from here. But when we get in front of the people, we're going to carry ourselves and conduct ourselves in such a way that we're going to act like and look like we know what we're doing. Because as long as people think you know what you're doing, they'll follow you. Most of them will. But if the people ever start to get the idea you don't know what you're doing, you've lost them. So my goal is to always act like and look like I know what I'm doing. If I don't, it'll be mine and God's secret. Maybe me, Lisa, and God's secret. But in order to lead people, they want to believe, hey, this guy knows, we have a plan, whatever that may be. If that's we're gonna build a church building, or whether that's we're gonna go to Haiti and try to reach refugees for Jesus or whatever. They want to know, Brother Mark, do we have a plan or not? Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, I mean, I think everything was bathed in prayer for sure. For sure. Do what? He's the only one with a horse. I mean, he's on the horse doing the inspection. He is, yeah. I don't think he took anybody with him. I think he just kind of went by himself. Uh, I mean, unless I misread that, with a few men. Okay, with a few men. Okay. Well, we're not just an animal. We're told, but notice, we know something about how bad the conditions of the walls were because in verse 14, his animal couldn't pass. Presumably not under the gate or whatever because it was in such bad array. Whether that be a horse or a donkey or whatever the animal was. Um, so I mean that's how bad it was. He couldn't even get through as the way was blocked. Yeah, 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 yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. He's not an engineer. He's not a brick mason. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. I'm thinking. So, A, it tells me that God really did call him, or these people would have never followed him. B, man, he would have made like a great football coach because he can coach them up, man. If he can get these people to build a wall, I mean, that's pretty good. All right, let's look on. Let's to verse 17 here. Finish up this chapter. Then I said to them, "You see the distress." Now he's making his pitch to the leaders. You see the distress that we're in. How Jerusalem lies waste and its gates are burned with fire. Come and let us build the wall of Jerusalem that we may no longer be a reproach. And I told them of the hand of my God which had been good upon me, and also of the king's words that he had spoken to me. So they said, "Let us rise up and build." Then they set their hands to this good work. But when Sanballat the Horonite, Tobiah the Ammonite official, and Geshem the Arab heard of it, they laughed at us and despised us and said, "What is this thing that you're doing? Will you rebel against the king?" So I answered them and said to them, "The God of heaven himself will prosper us. Therefore we his servants will arise and build, but you have no heritage or right or memorial in Jerusalem." Okay, so God's going to rebuild a wall in Jerusalem. How's he going to do it? With, with the Jews. So he's already called Nehemiah, so he's going to use Nehemiah to build it. But what do we also learn here? Nehemiah is not going to do it alone. In other words, if the only person building the wall was Nehemiah, it would have never gotten built. So God laid the burden on Nehemiah. You're going to head this thing up. You're going to lead it, but it's going to take everybody to make it happen. So, most of the time when God is calling you to something, then you may be the one going to head it up, but you're probably not going to accomplish it by yourself. Um, God, God sent me to Claremore, Oklahoma. I had to get a map to figure out where that was when Dwayne Kruger from the search committee called me. I'm like, what? Um, but he didn't want me to. He didn't want me to grow a church by myself. He didn't want me to build a church by myself. He didn't want us to function as a church by myself. If all that happens on Sunday is I show up and I do my thing and then we all go home, we're spinning our wheels. It takes all of us, and God is working in conjunction, and God is taking what He's called you to do and what you to do and what you to do and what I am to do, and He puts it all together, and together it works. And that's the only way that it can work. Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Boy, did you really not? Wow. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I know. So, but it's kind of what you're saying. Kind of leads into my next little question there. Leadership skills that Nehemiah displays. What does he say to these people? He lays out the vision. This is what God's called me to do. This is my vision. I've inspected. This is what I see needs to be done. And what does he say? Yeah. Come on, let's do it. What do y'all say? And what do they say? Let's arise and build it. Let's build it. Yeah, he had to, yeah, sure. I mean, it kind of started with him. And here's what I found, and it took me a little while to learn this. In working with churches. I mean, early on, I would get to some little church, and it just seemed like they didn't want to do anything. I mean, they just want to sit there. And now there are churches, I'll grant you, and there are some people that all they want to do, we're happy just to run 20 on Sunday morning and just sit here. As long as I've got a comfortable pew to sit on and I can come and visit with my friends a little bit on Sunday morning and then go home, I'm happy. And the rest of the world can go to the devil, and I don't care as long as because I'm perfectly happy. And I used to think that was like why churches didn't do anything. But I've come to believe that's not really most people. Most people want to do something. Most churches want to do something. It's not as though they sit there and go, well, we don't ever want to reach people. We don't ever want to grow. We don't ever want to build. We don't ever want to, do any kind of missions. We just want to sit here. They want to do something. They just don't know what to do. And so part of being a leader of people, of God's people, is you got to come in and you got to coach them up a little bit. You got to give them the vision, and you got to make them believe, hey, we can do this. God's for us. He's on our side. He's called us to do this. We can do this, whatever that is. If it's something as glorious as building the temple, or something so seemingly mundane as building a wall. If God is God telling you to do it, none of it is mundane. None of it is unimportant. So you got to come in and you got to say, hey guys, let me tell you what God told me. And here's my vision. We're going to build this wall. And Jerusalem is going to be great again. And the temple is going to be great again. And people in Jerusalem are going to be safe again. And we're going to have a place that Messiah will one day come to. And we can do it. Now we just need to come together and pull together. I've already looked at this. I have a plan. We have God on our side. We can do this. What do you say? And he gets them all excited. And when they say, well, let's arise and build. Let's do it. Most of the time, that's how God's people react. It's not that they don't want to do anything. They just need to be coached up a little bit. A lot of times they just don't know what to do. They really need somebody to come in and just lead them, coach them up a little bit. That's my words. I mean, that's I don't think coach them up is a biblical term, but you know what I'm trying to say. They just need some encouragement. They need to see the vision. They need to see the plan, and then they need you to coach them up and encourage them. We can do this. God is for us. God is on our side. We can do it. And then God's people get on board with it, and look out. There's nothing that God can't do with a fired up group of people like that. So, I mean, I see a lot of great leadership in Nehemiah. Nehemiah is a great leadership study. If God is calling you into some kind of leadership, man, it's a great study right here. Do what? Enthusiasm isn't taught, it's caught. That's true. I heard the same about evangelism, by the way. Evangelism is more caught than taught. And I heard it from my evangelism professor. He said, really, I can teach you a class, but if you really want to learn how to do it, just go out and start telling people about Jesus. And so, anyway. So, more adversaries come along. We now get a third one in the mix. We have Sanballat, Tobiah, and now we add Geshem the Arab. And they laugh at him. It's going to get worse than just the laughing, but they start out that way. How does he deal with them? How does he deal with these adversaries? Yeah, so, do what? Yeah, yeah, right. So he says, we're going to build this wall. I mean, Nehemiah's, he's the kind of guy you think you'd like. He's got a little grit in his craw, and he just kind of bows up to him here, and he says, we will build this wall, and we're going to build it because God is going to prosper us. In other words, we're not going to build it because we're great builders. We're going to build it because God is great, and he's going to use us to build it. But you have no part in what God is doing here. He's bold, Huh? Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah, I don't really understand the Arabs' claim on Jerusalem. I think they're really kind of grasping at straws, but anyway. Um, and I think there's a lesson in that, for today, um, and whatever God is calling you to do. I would just say, seldom have I accomplished anything of significance for God, or God through me, however you want to say that, that I didn't have somebody opposing me. I mean, and you want to carry it all the way back to youth ministry days. We're talking over 30 years now of ministry. And I'm hard pressed to find a time, a season of time in that 30 plus years where somebody wasn't trying to get in the way of what God was doing in me and through me. And often it's the people that are supposed to know God. And I think that's the most frustrating. It's not the world most of the time. It's the people that are supposed to know God that seem to be opposed. And I don't understand exactly. I don't know if they don't understand what God is doing, or if they just, like Peter, lets Satan kind of get in the middle of what God is doing. Jesus tells Peter, Peter, the one that, has that great confession, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus said, you are Peter, and on this rock I'll build my church, and the gates of hell won't prevail against him. And then later on, what does Peter say? Jesus, you're not going to die. And what does Jesus do? He turns to him and says, get behind me, Satan. Your mind is not on the things of God. So I just say that as a word of, I guess, encouragement, and just to kind of be prepared that if God has called you to something, you can expect adversity. You could expect adversaries, and often that will even come from the people that you would expect to be on your side and helping you, because they're supposed to love God too. Questions on those verses before we get to the little application stuff? Yeah. Yeah, because it's great. It is a great. So well, this is a stretch. If I were like a professor at West Point and I was teaching the generals of tomorrow, my textbook would be Nehemiah. I would say, you look at what he did and how he led his people. That's what we need on the battlefield. Putin might take a page from Nehemiah to help his war effort to some extent, but anyway, that's a different story. Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, yeah. It's a great study of leadership here. So, what principles of the call of God on our life can we glean from this chapter? Here's just some things that I saw, and you may have others that you can add to the list. God will call you to a great work of faith, but He usually won't call you alone. In other words, to do it all by yourself. And that's a good thing, because we are the body of Christ, and we need each other. You cannot complete your call without all of us. I cannot complete my call without all of you. We need each other, and that's important to remember. This is what I said, and you can see if it plays out in your own life as well. Seldom has God left me without one or two adversaries, as I said. But I would add this. I also don't remember a time where He left me without one or two friends. And that's important. So I think you can safely say you can expect both. If you're following the call of God, whatever that is, to teach a Sunday school class, to build a wall, to preach a sermon, to do a mission trip, whatever it is, you can expect one or two adversaries. You can expect one or two friends. I've always seemed to have both along the way. And if God has called you to a work, He'll supply what you need to accomplish it. I mean, look how He supplied Nehemiah. You got the king's forest, you got a military escort, you got papers. Look how God worked in all of that. And whatever God is calling you to do, I think it's reasonable to expect Him to supply what you need to accomplish that. And if He's not doing that, that might be the time to back up and go, well, is this really what God, that might be the time that you need to back up and pray some more and fast some more and seek some more and say, okay, is this really what God's telling us to do? Because if God wants us to do it, He ought to provide a way to do it. What does this story teach us about faith and fear and courage and action? True faith is not so much about not being afraid as it is about doing the right thing even if you're afraid. Nehemiah said, I was very much afraid, and yet he demonstrates great faith and great courage, not because he wasn't afraid, but because he did the right thing anyway, regardless of how he felt about it. I think it's ridiculous to assume that if God is calling you to some work that is completely out of your comfort zone, and He's telling you to leave your job, leave your home, go to this strange land. There's danger there. There's adversity. There's opposition. There's there's all of these challenges. I think it's crazy to assume that you won't have any fear. But real faith does the right thing anyway, regardless of whether you're afraid. And courage plays in. It seems like, courage is one of those things today that's one of those characteristics that we all value, but it seems to be so rare in the world today, real courage. And people mistake a lot of things for true courage. Things like anger and violence, which has nothing to do with courage, by the way. And we get this mixed up idea that if I'm courageous, that means I'm not afraid of anything. Well, if you're not afraid of anything, you know what you are? You're foolish. You're crazy. Yeah. Courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about having the fortitude to say, you know what? I'm scared to death, but my mission is to take that hill, and I'm going to charge it, and I'm either going to take it or I'm going to die trying. For Nehemiah, he said, I'm scared to death, but God wants me to build that wall. I'm going to build it or I'm going to die trying. That is courage, and that's what our world needs more of today. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. You've got to admire the Ukrainian people and the people that are fighting down to the last man. I mean, that's what movies are made of. I mean, Hollywood is salivating at this. They just can't wait to get the story, but what's playing out is better than anything Hollywood could write. Courage is a byproduct of faith, and faith that doesn't ultimately lead to action is really no faith at all. I mean, that's what James teaches us. So anyway, Nehemiah chapter 2, questions or comments? I have a little video for you tonight. It is kind of a continuation of what we started last week, so it's kind of the part 2 of that. We'll see it this time.
In the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when the wine was set before him, I took the wine and gave it to the king. The troubled look on Nehemiah's face aroused the king's suspicions. The king said to me, "Why do you look troubled since you are not ill? It must be from evil intentions." Then I was very frightened. I said to the king, "Why should I not look troubled when the city where my ancestors are buried lies waste, its gates consumed by fire?" Nehemiah musters all his courage and implores the king, "If it pleases the king, send me to Judah, to the city where my ancestors are buried, so I can build it." The king agrees. He appoints Nehemiah governor of the province of Yehud and sends him to Jerusalem with a military escort. Nehemiah leaves the pleasures of the Persian Empire behind. He is driven by a single goal: to build the wall of Jerusalem. But Nehemiah's appointment as governor of Yehud infuriates the leaders of the neighboring nations. They are vehemently opposed to the rebuilding of the wall. When Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite servant heard, they were very distressed that someone had come to do good for the children of Israel. They refused to let Jerusalem once again be the center of life of the Jewish people. Therefore, when Nehemiah arrives in Jerusalem, he slips out secretly to check on the state of the wall. So I came to Jerusalem and was there for 3 days. And I arose at night, I and a few men with me. And I told no one what my God had inspired me to do for Jerusalem. And I had no animal with me other than the animal I was riding. What Nehemiah saw was depressing. The entire area around the wall was full of fallen stones and ruins. He was barely able to pass through. I inspected the broken walls of Jerusalem and its gates that had been consumed by fire. There was no room for the animal under me to pass. I went through the valley gate and returned. Right here in the area of the ruined wall that Nehemiah inspected, archaeologist Yigal Shiloh found a massive rockfall from the wall and the houses of the city. Turns out that when the Babylonians destroyed the wall, they also destroyed the network of terraces supporting the homes of the city. All the houses collapsed and the stones fell down the hill. Without a wall, there is no security. And without security, it is impossible to survive. But rebuilding the wall seems to Nehemiah an impossible task. It would involve clearing rubble heaps, gathering stones, and engaging in a huge amount of rigorous construction. It would take a lot of hard work and time. And there is no time. At any moment, the neighboring rulers might discover the plan and crush it. Nehemiah appeals urgently to the people of Jerusalem. I said to them, "You see the bad state we are in, how Jerusalem lies waste, its gates burned. Come, let us build the wall of Jerusalem, so that we are no longer a disgrace." Nehemiah decides to leave the ruins as they are and build the new wall higher up at the top of the hill.
That's a very interesting pronunciation of that. Yeah. All right. Appreciate you being here tonight. We're going to close in a word of prayer, and Phil, I think, wants to say something. They said none of them. One. I told them you was going to earn your chicken dinner. You're going to clean the whole cabin by yourself, man. Oh, you got it. You got some more here. You got to coach them up, Phil. That's what I was teaching them. You know, you got to. God, I have a plan. God has laid this on my heart. We're going to go down there and we're going to clean this cabin. Got to coach them up.